Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
I want to start by talking with you about what you do when you have a difficult neighbor. Have you ever had one of those, difficult neighbor?
You're talking about somebody we know. Good.
So I had one of those. I know some of you here have some difficult neighbors, so maybe this will help you. I don't know. But I had one, and this was the neighbor who would just look for stuff to get mad about, to get angry about. And especially when we first moved into our home. We've been there how long now?
17 years.
17 years. You know, if a tree in somebody else's garden blocked his sight line, he would get mad. If he could hear music from another house, oh my goodness, he would get mad. If somebody brought their garbage bin in late, he would get mad. One time, when we first moved into our neighborhood, he came to speak to me. I heard this knock at the door. We must have been there just a week, I think. And he came to talk to me about how much noise my children had made. You know, we had a few friends over for a barbecue. And the kids really made a regular amount of noise, right? But nothing excessive. But he was just complaining about stuff. And I was going to let him have it. I was going to really let him have it. And then I remembered Jesus said, love your neighbor. Jesus also said, love your enemy. And I realized I actually enjoyed indulging my irritation at this man's anger problem. Right? I would remember examples of his irritability and recite them to others and myself as evidence of my own spiritual superiority. I didn't love him, thank you. I didn't love him. I didn't seek to love him. I realized, though, that he wasn't my problem. I was my problem. You see, we have a tendency to divide the world into two groups. People who really have problems and normal people like me. In contrast, Jesus divided the world into these two groups, right? People who really have problems and know it, and people who really have problems but think they don't really have problems. This week, we're looking at anger. Jesus, in the Sermon on the Mount, will redefine what it means to be a good person when it comes to dealing with anger. These are amazing, admittedly, initially really confusing, I mean, they sound really weird, but ultimately deeply inspiring words that we're going to read from Jesus this morning. So let's do that together. You have heard it was said to the people long ago, you shall not murder. And anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. But I tell you that anyone who's angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment. Again, anyone who says to a brother or sister, Racha, is answerable to the court. And anyone who says, you fool, will be in danger of the fire of hell. Therefore, if you are offering your gift at the altar, and this is church, by the way, if you are offering your gift at the altar, and there remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First go and be reconciled to them, then come and offer your gift. Settle matters quickly with your adversary who is taking you to court. Do it while you are still together on the way, or your adversary may hand you over to the judge, and the judge may hand you over to the officer, and you may be thrown into prison. Truly, I tell you, you will not get out until you have paid the last penny. Now, anger is a universal human problem. In the ancient world, there were no police departments or prosecutors. The rich and the powerful, they could get away with anything, and they did. So the Old Testament protects the weak. This is where Jesus starts, right? The Old Testament said, you shall not murder. If somebody was killed in those days, then a blood avenger could chase them down and execute the murderer, right? The blood avenger would usually be the fastest, toughest, strongest guy in the family, like sort of a Vin Diesel or a Rock or Jean Severard kind of character, you know?
Yeah, come on.
I'm glad you got that. That was actually a huge step forward injustice in the ancient world. But over time, human nature being what it is, people in Israel started thinking, when it comes to anger, they started thinking that there are two kinds of people, good people and bad people. Murderers and non-murderers. As long as I haven't actually physically taken somebody out, then I'm in the good category. I'm in the clear as far as the law is concerned, is what they were thinking. So Jesus begins to describe a good person, a kingdom kind of person, and he starts with this thing called anger. And then we'll look next week, he goes on to sexuality. And then he goes on to relational unhappiness. And then he goes on to dishonesty and so on and so forth. Now, the order of the topics in the Sermon on the Mount is very important. I know I started the series in chapter 7 quite a few weeks ago. I realized that. But the order of the topics that Jesus brings to us is very important. The Sermon on the Mount is often treated as a collection of just random sayings by Jesus, but it's not. I believe that Jesus starts with anger for a profound reason. Anger is the number one offender of spiritual life. If you look in the Bible, starting with Cain and Abel, Jacob and Esau, Joseph and his brothers, all the way through the Bible, and if you get into our lives today, real life, according to Living with Abuse, which is a UK charity, domestic abuse will affect 1 in 4 women and 1 in 6 men in their lifetime, right? And it accounts for 16% of all violent crime in the UK. It has more repeat victims than any other crime, and it is the single most quoted reason for becoming homeless. That's staggering, guys. Look at unpleasant workplaces. Look at miserable marriages. The vast majority of wrongdoing involves anger and contempt. And if you eliminate anger problems, you would eliminate the single greatest cause of human misery. Now, why is anger the number one problem? Well, it has to do with your kingdom. You would remember that I've been talking about kingdoms recently, and we've been looking at Jesus' good news, where up there, the kingdom of God is coming down here through Jesus. Everybody has a kingdom. Your kingdom is where your will is in charge, right? Everybody has a personal kingdom where your will is in charge. Your will is your ability to choose. It's your ability to create, to initiate. It's a form of energy. It makes things happen. So what's anger? Well, first of all, anger is a response to a thwarted will. Anger is the spontaneous response we experience when our will gets thwarted. Anger is your will saying, hey, something is getting in my way, and your will is the energy, So anger is a form of negative personal energy. Do you hear me, guys? Yeah. The purpose of anger is to alert us that something is wrong, and it's to energize us into action, and so that we can correct it. Now, this almost always immediately moves to, I will harm whatever it is that obstructs my will. I want to destroy it. I'm in a hurry to go to an important meeting, and I'm running late, and I notice that my shoelace is untied, and I bend down to tie my shoelace, and I'm in such a hurry that I pull it hard and it breaks. My first thought is, the stupid shoelace. Am I the only one?
No, not at all.
Now, a shoelace, can I say, cannot be stupid. Because a shoelace cannot be intelligent, okay? We have smartphones, we don't have smart shoelaces, okay? But when I'm angry, I desire to harm the stupid shoelace. And that shoelace, it thwarted my will. It should be destroyed. Here's the problem. Is the world set up to always please your will? No. So you get angry a lot, right? I grew up playing tennis with my brother Bev. We do it all the time. And tennis players will hit a bad shot. And what do? They get angry. I'm sure you've seen that. And not at themselves, but they will break their racket because it hit the shot. Okay? They will the destruction of their racket. And I've seen it time and time again. I read about a man, not in this country. I'll leave you to guess what country this is, right? Where they have lots of guns available. That's all I'll say. Whose car got stuck in the snow. And the man got so furious, he got so mad that he took his wheel wrench out of the boot and he smashed the windows of his own car. Right? And then he got out his gun and then he shot all 4 tires of his car, right? And then he reloaded and he emptied a clip into the car itself, the body of the car. The police called it a case of auticide. Hello. Now, of course, the number one cause of anger in people is not shoelaces, and it's not tennis rackets, and it's not cars. Do you know what it is? It's people. It's people. Pretty soon, I think not this stupid shoelace or not that stupid tennis racket, I think that stupid person. That's what pops into my head. Okay, the problem though, Jesus is concerned about is not just that my emotion is now aroused. The problem is not even just that my will has been thwarted. The problem is now I will harm to another person. I want to believe that they're stupid. I want to believe that they're bad and that they're deserving of bad things. You see, this is the second, it leads to the second dimension of anger now. Okay, anger is not just when my will gets thwarted, it moves quickly to the will to harm. I want to harm. For Jesus, it's never okay to cease to will the good for another person. Let me say that again, guys. To Jesus in the kingdom of God, it is never okay to cease to will the good for another person. Yeah. Never. And that's why he is so concerned about anger, which is why it is so fundamental. Have you not heard that it was said, anyone who murders will be subject to judgment, but I tell you that anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment. And now he uses a word that indicates intense anger. Okay? Orgizomenos is the word that he used. We get the word orgy from that word. In other words, an orgy of anger. Jesus deliberately describes the consequence in identical languages here, and I think I have it here. He says, anyone who murders will be subject to judgment, but I tell you that anyone who is angry will be subject to judgment. Really? Really? Just getting angry? This seems unbelievable. It seems like an impossibly high bar that people have tried all kinds of ways to wriggle out of actually having to obey what Jesus said here. Some people say, their way of justifying it is that in the Sermon on the Mount, he was actually offering the kingdom of heaven to Israel. So the Sermon on the Mount was an ethic for that particular kingdom, the Israelites. But Israel refused to make him king, so the Sermon on the Mount doesn't really apply to us, and we don't have to worry about that. That's not true. Some people have said that Jesus is only referring here to unjustified anger. In this idea, he must have meant only unjustified anger is forbidden. This was so prevalent, many of you, depending on your translation, will have this footnote in your own Bibles. If you have one of those study Bibles, you might see it there, that some ancient manuscripts add the phrase, anybody who is angry without cause at their brother or sister. In the ancient world, of course, they had no printing presses. There was no Gutenberg press in those days. So every Bible was hand copied. And what happened was, often scribes copying, when they would hear the text, would think, oh, Jesus couldn't have meant angry for any reason. He must have meant if you're angry without cause. So they actually added those words. In other words, they were saying unjustified anger is bad, but I'm experiencing righteous indignation here. So of course that's okay. Now actually, that's not what Jesus was saying. And I'll explain. Some people say Jesus has taken the high bar of Moses and made it even higher, so we would realize that it's impossible to obey Jesus. So as long as we believe the right doctrine about Jesus, we can go to heaven without ever intending to obey him. No. Jesus said, anybody who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment. When people reinterpret Jesus so they don't have to obey what he said about not getting angry, it makes me angry. In fact, although I think it's more righteous indignation, right? Sure. You know, one of the dangers of anger is present right here. We enjoy it. We like it because it makes us feel a little superior. You never meet a humble, angry person, do you? I've never met one. Anger feeds human vanity. Jesus' teaching on this is really simple. It's not particularly complex. It's not hyperbole. God never stops willing the good, ever, for anybody. Can I say that again? God never stops willing the good ever for anybody. Never. God is perfectly capable of simultaneously discerning and judging someone's actions as evil, knowing precisely how much of the responsibility for that is their genetics, how much of that is on the environment, how much is their personal choice, and at the same time, guys, wholeheartedly willing that person's good. God can do that. Yeah. But for me, as soon as I start to indulge anger, I tend to stop willing the good for the person I'm angry at. And as soon as I cease to will somebody's good, this is not a feeling, this is an act of the will, guys, then God's will is not being done in my life. God always judges that as an evil thing. I'm choosing the kingdom of self over God's kingdom. Anger is dangerous. Yeah. Jesus knows, because it justifies not willing the good of the other person in that relationship. And then it moves to another phase of anger. Anger is contempt that leaks out of us. Jesus goes on, because indulged anger never just stays buried. It leaks into my words and it leaks into my deeds, my actions. So it doesn't just stay internally, it wants to come out, it leaks out. He gives two pictures of this. He says, anyone who says racha is answerable to the Sanhedrin. But anyone who says you fool is in danger of the fires of hell. Now, racha in that day was an insult. It's a guttural sound that you make when you're about to spit on someone. You know what I'm talking about? Spit is a gesture of contempt. Anger moves us towards contempt. You worthless piece of whatever. Often, contempt involves the language of filth. Now, some people will read what Jesus says here and think, I don't explode. What are you talking about, John? I don't yell. I don't curse. So I don't have any anger problems. Oh, brother, yes, you do. Can I just say, we have an infinite number of ways to convey anger. How we look at somebody, how we don't look at somebody, how we speak to somebody, how we don't speak to somebody, how we touch them, how we avoid touching them. Sarcasm, sabotage, forgetting, passive-aggressive, withdrawing, avoiding, or placating somebody out of fear or appeasing wrongly can be every bit as unloving and sinful as exploding in wrath. Now, here's the point. Jesus is not giving a new set of harder rules. Sometimes we mistakenly read Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount as giving a new list of harder rules for us to follow. Sometimes people will think, well, okay, now I'm not allowed to murder anybody. Okay, I get that. I cannot call them racha. I can't call them fool. But fortunately, there are a lot of other bad words I can use. I'm not using those words. See, Jesus is not giving new rules here. He is illustrating. He is illustrating what it looks like to have an aim or to have a heart that's pervaded by love, that wants to will the good. This is the inside-out goodness. Remember I talked last week about surpassing goodness? This is what surpassing goodness looks like. There's a bumper sticker in our day, and it says, "There is no excuse for domestic violence." And there is no excuse for domestic violence. Churches have often been way too slow in communicating that loud and clear. There is no excuse for domestic violence. It's evil in God's sight, and it must be stopped. Yeah. But here's the key. You cannot eliminate domestic violence by trying to eliminate domestic violence while leaving the toxic, angry thoughts and desires and feelings of the heart unchanged. Yeah. You can't avoid anger by trying to avoid anger. If my heart is not transformed, anger, the will to harm, and sin will triumph, and it will sneak out of me in 1,000 unseen ways. Yeah. Anger, can I just say this to you? Anger eats behavior modification for breakfast.
Yeah. Good. That's really good.
So we turn now in Jesus' teaching to how living in the kingdom can transform our angry hearts. What does that look like? Jesus began by talking about 3 things you don't do. Okay, you don't live with the will to harm. You don't say destructive things like racha or fool or a bunch of other stuff that he didn't mention. And then he goes on to give 2 positive illustrations to what a kingdom person, a person of surpassing goodness, actually does. And again, let me just say, these aren't laws, these are illustrations. And let's look at how to live in the kingdom when it comes to anger. The method Jesus talks about, the methods that he talks about are, number 1, make reconciling a broken relationship a higher priority than doing something religious.
That's good.
Jesus says, you're bringing your gift to the altar, you're doing something religious, and then you remember that somebody has a problem with you. Maybe they're right. Maybe they're wrong. Maybe it's a mix of both of those. It doesn't matter. Jesus says, do reconciliation first. That's what love would do. That's what love would do, guys. We just love. I had to race to the shop one morning because we forgot to buy school lunches the night before. And if you have kids, you know you need school lunches unless they're having lunch at school, at the canteen. But I had to hurry like crazy, and I was in a hurry, and I eventually did the shop, and I got to the queue, and it was taking forever. Okay, I won't mention the name of the store, but it's a store with really long queues sometimes, and it particularly had a long queue. And people in this line, can I just say, I felt at the time, were so self-centered. They bring children who move so slowly. Right? They take their shopping out of their trolleys with no sense of urgency whatsoever. Right? And then they get to their turn in front of the person at the till, and they ask a question about a product, or now they want a refund of some sort or something. And then I realized when I was standing there that I was viewing every single person in front of me as an enemy. Yeah. They were obstacles to my getting through the line. And by the way, it's my fault that I was late. Yeah. I'm supposed to be a minister of Jesus, right? And in this moment, in my mind and in my heart, this is what's going on in the inside of me. Idiot! You know, asking for now a refund or asking a question about the product. Idiot! And if it's not coming out of my mouth, it's for sure in my eyes and in my face and in my body. And now the invitation from Jesus is not, okay, grit your teeth and avoid murder. Try really hard not to say racha or fool. Everything else is fair game. His invitation is this: die to ego. Yeah. Die to yourself and the kingdom of self. Live in reality. Just recognize, I cannot, by the force of my tremendous will a line to move any faster than it already is. I'm not in charge of supermarkets or traffic or weather. I live in God's kingdom, not in mine. I can let go of everything that is not in my control, and I can actually will the good for the people in this line. And I did that then. I just started talking pleasantly to people. I love your cap, and I actually got home on time to sort out lunches. As we bring this to a close, in God's kingdom, here's the thing. I cease to be attached to my will being done. I cease to be attached to it, and I live in the goodness of God's kingdom. That's what life without anger consists of. And one of the things, people who are doing that is that they seek reconciliation before doing something religious. Now I want to talk to you about this for a moment. Sometimes reconciling will be really, really complex. I know. It may take time. It may take years. It may take multiple conversations. I know. Part of that is in the hand of the other person. They may never be willing to do that. I know. I get it. But I want to say, some of you are perhaps rationalizing not doing this. You're saying, hey, this problem is not my fault. This relational breakdown is not my responsibility. They should make the first move. I know he'll never change, and I know she will, never change. I understand that. I get it. You may say, I'm not harboring no ill will, and so I'm in compliance with what Jesus had to say. I don't have to go seek reconciliation. My conscience is clear. I'm not living with angry feelings. These are the ways that we can justify it, guys. You see, Jesus did not say, if your brother and sister has a problem with you, manage your emotions so you don't feel angry anymore. That's not what he said. Contempt avoidance is not love. Love wills the good. I know it can be complex. I know the other person might be utterly hard-hearted. I get it. Maybe all you can offer to God is genuine willingness. I get it. But guys, an awful lot of people let themselves off the hook when it comes to reconciliation. Love seeks reconciliation. Love wills reconciliation. If you're not doing that, if you're not willing it, if you're not open for it, if you're not seeking it in a significant relationship, don't kid yourself that you're obeying Jesus. You cannot control the outcome, but you can give your heart. Now, here's another how that Jesus gives us. How to live in the kingdom when it comes to anger. Number 2, initiate genuine kindness to your foe, to your enemy. He gives the second illustration. This is a courtroom scene. He says, suppose somebody is taking you to court. You're in a legal or a financial battle with them, and it makes you mad. What do? Jesus says, settle matters quickly. Settle matters quickly. The word he uses actually means make friends with, be kindly disposed toward. In other words, you genuinely try to understand and help that person. Now, that may not mean doing what they want. I'm not saying that. For sure, it does mean, though, that you're seeking what is best for them in God's eyes. That might be a legal thing. It might be. I know some people who've been through that in really difficult ways. Maybe you have a rival at work. Maybe that rival is mistreating you. Maybe you have an enemy at school, Maybe you have a difficult neighbor, like I did. Maybe you have a very troubled or troublesome ex-spouse. Pray for them. Pray for them. Ask God to show you if there is a kindness that you can offer them. Not out of fear, not out of obligation, but out of love. Maybe there isn't, but ask God to show you. The main point with these examples is that you seek reconciliation. In other words, do kindness for an enemy. It isn't do these behaviors like they're new laws. Jesus is inviting us here to ponder what kind of thought life, what kind of feelings and moods, what habits of mind, of body and speech would you find in the kind of person who would just routinely pursue reconciliation above religious correctness? Who would reach out in non-anxious, relaxed warmth to win over an enemy? When you ponder over this in your own life and my life, we begin, can I say, to get a vision for righteousness that surpasses that of the Pharisees. So, 2 more practices and then we'll wind up really quickly. Number 3, go through these really quickly. Be intentional about how you feed your mind. You see, our culture will feed your mind to make you mad. You go on social media, you go on the news, you go on talk radio, if you listen to that, and it's, in a sense, it just makes you mad. The newspapers. Can I just say, beware of the merchants of outrage. Yeah. Merchants of outrage. Beware of the merchants of outrage. Are you listening to talk radio or to talk TV? I do. Nikki knows. And sometimes what it does is it's just stoking anger and contempt at a political opposition. Here's a true story. I heard about a political commentator on the one side of the spectrum, and he said, hey, if your pastor at your church uses the phrase social justice, stop going to that church. That same week, a political commentator on the other side of the spectrum said, hey, if this week your pastor does not preach about the violation of social justice, stop going to that church. My suggestion is stop listening to those guys.
Amen, brother. Yes. Amen.
Here's some advice from Jesus. If someone forces you to go with them 1 mile, then you go with them 2.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, the backdrop, everybody would have known in that day, is legally, in those days, a Roman soldier could force an Israelite to carry their backpack 1 mile. Those soldiers were the hated enemies politically and religiously. Now Jesus is saying, if you're living in the kingdom of God, will the good for your Roman soldier enemies. Not only when they force you, carry their backpack 1 mile, and when you get to the end of that trip, ask them, can I help you a little more? Can I carry it another mile? Now, he's not giving a law here. He's not saying, well, I'm going to take your backpack, Roman soldier, because Jesus said I have to, and you don't want to go another mile? Well, too bad. Jesus says I have to. So I'm taking your backpack 1 mile, right? It's not a law, guys. It's an illustration here. Yeah. This week, go out of your way to do something kind for somebody with whom you ardently disagree politically or spiritually. Ask God to help you. Do it with a generous heart, not gritted teeth. Last one. Last how for this week. Reflect on the cross. See, the cross reminds us there's a great battle between good and evil, between love and anger, willing the harm. Anger tells me it's okay to will the bad for this contemptible person. Right? That's why almost all evil involves anger. That's why Jesus starts with anger. The battleground between good and evil, between love and anger, is in my soul and it's in my will. So, in closing, this week, when your will gets thwarted, and it will a lot, just starting with little ways, use it as an opportunity to die to your will. To hand over your will over to God and say, God, your will be done, not my will be done. Out of the unhurried, unworried abundance of the kingdom of the heavens, I can know the freedom of the surrendered will and learn the joy of a loving heart. Your will be done, O God, not mine. In light of the cross, Guys, can I say this in closing? Remember grace alone. Grace alone. This week, reflect on the cross. Grace alone. Don't let anger win in you. Let the cross win in you. Man, imagine if the world could see a community of people who are surrendering their anger to the kingdom of Jesus, to the kingdom of the cross. Oh my goodness, can you just imagine what that would look like? So next week, the sermon title is an old favorite, Sex in the City. You don't want to miss it. Let's pray.